Hello and welcome to Elvenly Railways. The picture you see here is a still from a VHS recording which is almost 40 years old. It captures two of the gentlest, kindest souls you could ever have wished to meet. On the left is my dad and on the right is Geoff, both real characters, both very unique and both irreplaceable. And there's a much older picture of my lovely mum and dad before I arrived on the scene. Back in the day when my parents moved into their home in Halesowen, and probably before I had arrived, Dad spotted a poster for the Severn Valley Railway on Geoff's garage door. Geoff lived down our road, Whitley Avenue in Halesowen. Dad would chat to anyone who had an interest in trains, or just anyone who would listen to his interest in trains. Dad and Geoff became friends, and Geoff made a model railway for Dad. He became Uncle Geoff to me and my sister Lynn. As our parents were only children, we had adopted uncles and aunts. He made a wonderful push-along train for me, which I remember to this day. The year was 1987, and we hired a video camera for a few days. It was one of those massive ones. The camera was huge, and you had to sort of support it on your shoulder while you were filming. I was filming, and there was my dad. He looks like he was missing his afternoon nap that day. To Geoff's side we see Geoff's nephew Jim, son of his brother Bob. We were out near the Severn Valley Railway filming some of the trains. Geoff had the timetable and was planning the best places and times to get some good footage. When he was a young bloke he became a fireman on British Railways at Saltley Depot.
What's that? There's only one of us can get that unless we shoot down the line.
He was one of those people, easily as interesting as someone like Fred Dibner, and just as much of a character, but not on TV. We're trying out some fancy experimental videography. I really fancied myself as some kind of Werner Herzog, I reckon, even though I'd never heard of him back then. I would have been 18 at the time. I still remember that Land Rover really well. It was a bit uncomfortable in the back from what I remember. When I was in my teens, I used to visit Geoff frequently, and I learnt much about railways, railway modelling, mines, engineering, and industrial archaeology from him. We used to visit places around the Black Country where we lived to see old historic railways and industrial areas, and he helped me with my garden railway. I must have been a right pain in the neck calling round all the time. There must have been days when he didn't want company, but he wouldn't have said anything. He had the patience of a saint. He also took me to the Black Country Museum where he did lots of work on the racecourse colliery. His picture was in their brochure at some point. Eventually my interests in music took precedence over my railway interests for a few years, and I didn't see Geoff as much, but years later I visited him whenever I got the chance. His genius never failed to impress me, and his knowledge was vast. Looking back, I wish I had spent much more time in his company over the years in the gaps where the visits were far too sporadic.
You got to take
If it had been a big reporter now, really, we would have filmed him.
Here we start to see some of Geoff's brilliant work with his industrial models and garden railways. I have kept the original video aspect to preserve as much of the visuals as possible. All Geoff's models worked and were hand built or converted from existing models. Many items utilise card in their construction, such as this loco, and once painted stood up well to the atmosphere in the garden and shed, as long as they weren't left in the rain. From what I remember here, Geoff had converted from O gauge narrow gauge running to gauge 1 and had widened the track from SM32 to SM45. The line could easily be lifted and converted to 3.5 inch gauge. I had a Hornby live steam rocket in 3.5 inch gauge around this time, and that started Geoff's interest in that gauge as far as I remember. This was using the rocket track, I believe, but later Geoff started using curtain rail and painted the side. The rail was pinned to wooden sleepers and it really looked the part. The white top just looked like the silver of the rail. Locos and road vehicles were converted from Halesowen and Mamod steam engines.
Now you're going to tip the camera. Been talking to this. Where's Dave's in them big flats up there?
No, it's not an estate.
What?
That's an estate. No, where the bakery is.
Yeah, I know.
That's an estate.
What's my...
Hang on, look. Carry on. There's some stuff there.
Whoops, boss.
So look again.
Oops, my fault.
It's a bit rough in this coffee.
It's my fault.
I don't know whether this will work or not, but I could try it. See what happens.
Try this up with the puppy.
It's all the same then, you just pull me away. It's ain't gonna work, it's for face. Oh, it's easy, I'm gonna do it slowly. Right? Slowly. I've got a plank up against that apple tree.
Yeah.
A trip to view some Black Country canals and an old engine house. I believe this to be near Cobb's Engine House or Windmill End Pumping Station in Rowley Regis in the Black Country. As I mentioned earlier, this was the sort of place we would visit to take in the history and views and find out what things had been left behind for us to spot.
Which way? This road. Run out. You completely run out of petrol. Push it across there. Can you reach it round? Got it.
Here we are at Bridgenorth Shed. Back in those days you could walk around freely and get up close to the locos. I'd been visiting the SVR since I was a baby due to my dad. Him and my mother were early shareholders. Dad loved having his photo taken by a loco. He loved the railways all his life, and that passion rubbed off on me. Some more footage of the waterfall seen earlier. I wouldn't have stood there myself, but Geoff didn't care. Here's my garden railway. The trains are narrow gauge, running on 32mm O gauge track, or roughly 16mm scale, or SM32. You can see stock that Geoff built for me, and stock I borrowed for the video. He built the buildings for me apart from the house, which was my sister Lynn's old doll's house. Note the working beam engine. The stock was a real mixture of Fowler, Novo, scratch built stuff, modified Lima, and lots more. Some running on batteries and some electric. From this I eventually went up to G gauge many years later, and then 5-inch gauge, and then 7¼ inch, as you know. Now we move many years into the future to see more of Geoff's inventions and models. Amazing. It was amazing what he could make from bits of junk and offcuts that many would just throw away.
Delete it and start again. Where's weight already? What if I'm sitting there? I'm standing
Not with my hat on.
I think I'll lose something in a 6-foot square.
Oh, that's awesome car like that one's.
Much of his construction utilised cardboard and old electrical mechanisms or gearboxes he created himself. He was a big inspiration to me, but I'm no engineer. I muddle through and bodge where he would have got something working beautifully. Jim told me that he arrived one day to find one of Geoff's creations chopped up and on the fire, as Geoff was planning his next one. Get you on it as well.
I think the local off to do which I've got to mark which. I can't remember which way it works.
Oh yeah, because you don't want it to blow.
It will suck if it's on the right. If it's on the right try. It's more for just sucking what gathers on here.
Oh yeah,
Screwing up anyway. It's going to go tremendous amount of time. You might pick nothing about what you want it to. It's more for like that spillage on there.
Oh yeah.
If it goes on a battery charge, it develop more power.
Yeah.
You just go on, it doesn't do.
Brilliant.
Turn it to the roll on it and keep by hand with them.
Oh, I see.
Got 2 needs, you see, to it's all about 3 wagons, you see, and I've got to keep missing. it's got a long pole on it now.
Yeah.
It's unprofessional, but I don't have time for the next load to come
the
out
next one.
the pit now. No trouble with electrical connection.
I got in touch with Jim recently for a little bit more information about the history of Geoff, and this is what he said. Geoff was born on the 13th of February 1950 and attended Richmond School for Boys in Halesowen until the summer of 1965. His first job was apprentice engineer at a Cannock colliery. This didn't last long as his mum didn't like him travelling all that way and didn't want him going down coal mines. The next job was working for British Railways, delivering mail internally at the offices on Smallbrook Queensway in Birmingham. Next job was trainee locomotive cleaner at Saltley Shed, which progressed to past fireman at Saltley. With the demise of steam in '68, he was moved to Bescot as second man on the diesel locomotives, with the aim to become a driver, but his heart wasn't in it after the end of steam. His firing days, I think, were his absolute favourite job, and he would have stayed there forever, as long as steam locomotives were there. His favourite locos were 8 and 9Fs, and he could more or less tell you every number of every one that he fired. He always told me about moving the large oil trains to Kingsbury, when if he had a decent driver with him, he would let him drive back to Saltley. Worth mentioning is the fact that every day of his British Railways career, whether it was Saltley or Bescot, he travelled by push bike from Halesowen in all weathers. On becoming 21, he passed his Class 2 HGV driving test, and this would be his main job with various companies for the next 20 years. During the 80s, he became a volunteer with the Black Country Museum mining group, where they maintained the racecourse colliery and even found a mine that was disused on the museum site. This was excavated and brought back to life with newly fabricated headframe, winding gear, and even a working screening plant. It actually produced coal up until the NCB found out and put a stop to it. Brook Shaft, as it is called, is still on the museum site, but it is not part of the exhibit. How long it will be there, I don't know, as the last member of the mining group, George Price, sadly passed away last year. He also worked for the museum for a short time as their resident JCB driver, which he loved, and met all sorts of interesting folk, including Mr. Fred Dibner. During the 90s he had various jobs. In the noughties, he had a change of career and took on the role of trailer mechanic for Hales Freight in Wednesbury, that I took over from him in 2007 and still enjoy to this day. Geoff went into semi-retirement around this time, but would still come to work most days to make sure I was doing it right. In 2008, I think it was the exact 40th anniversary of the end of steam, we both got to be engine driver and fireman and 46443 at the Severn Valley Railway, probably one of my greatest and proudest memories. Geoff, or Uncle Geoff, as he is still called by everybody, was the epitome of eccentric. He never did anything the way anybody else would have done it, and although we always stood there scratching our heads thinking what the hell is he up to now, we always were amazed at what he did. He could make, mend and recycle anything. He was a carpenter, a fabricator, a mechanic and anything else he put his mind to doing, and it was all self-taught. He would do anything for anybody and was the kindest soul I've ever known. From 1975, when I was born, he was the most amazing uncle you could wish for. There was a garden railway in his garden, more or less in one incarnation or other, from the early 80s up until when he passed away in 2020. These railways weren't just a circle of track that you sat a train on and let go. They were working models that had to work on their own, with complicated mechanisms to load themselves and return them back down the 100 feet long garden. There was working scale screening plants, working scale excavators, model steam locomotives built to scale, everything made out of whatever was lying around. Nothing was bought in. It was all recycled. Mechanisms out of clocking in machines and one-arm bandits were all stripped down, record players and tape recorders stripped. Nothing was safe. He even made his own rails and sleepers. The only thing I remember him buying were the rechargeable batteries to power the locomotives. When the winter came and stopped play in the garden, he would build scale models in the house of working screening plants and coal mines. These never lasted long as they used to take up too much room. He would either give them away or break them up to build something else. I used to get upset when he got rid of them, but he couldn't see that they were worth anything, or they were anything special, or was saying it was a load of rubbish. What do you want to keep that for? In all the years he made anything, he never thought it was anything special. He just couldn't see it, but I still haven't seen anything equal to anything he's built. I know I'm biased, but it's true. If we weren't in the garden or at work together, we were at one of the country's museums or preserved railways. I don't know how we fitted it all in, but I wouldn't change a single minute. Thanks for that moving tribute, Jim.
Train works all right now. Oh, good. That would give that a monster sort them probably.
You've got a little barrier wagon in there instead
Yeah,
of the
that's
long
so
couple.
so that wagon will reach that.
Yeah, good idea.
Well, what do you mean? Switch forget how it works. What's that it up? Keep that in there. Ooh. Switch that off. Switch that off. Don't come be very often. I'll put black Smith on it now.
Got a spider on the head. Really?
Oh, this place is cool.
Is it a spider or not?
You don't know.
Oh, probably.
You've got to go straight for it. It's boy. We do it.
And Jim has preserved Geoff's last project in a workshop in his garden, and it still works just as it did. He very kindly gave me some of Geoff's old models as well, which I've got dotted about the house and shed.
There you have it.
Brilliant, mate. Great.
Horrible feeling I've just discharged all the coal into
Oh
it.
no. A picture from just a few years ago with me, Sarah and Geoff outside his shed. One day Geoff told me that when I was little I thought he lived in that shed, which was his workshop, the same one you saw in the video from the 80s. Eventually Geoff did literally live in his shed most of the time, preferring it to the house. The garden was always lovely, especially with the railway going through it. The shed had stood for many years and was still there the last time I went to the house to meet Jim. He wrote a great article for British Railway Modelling in the August 1996 edition. It was volume 4, number 5, £2 at the time. I've got it here in front of me. There's some lovely pictures in there of his railway. Geoff had a fondness for tea, biscuits, cigarettes and extra strong mints, and would whistle in a very melodious way. He had a great sense of humour, a great black country accent.
I suppose now the filming's finished, I've got to tidy all this perishing mess up. I wonder if I can magic it away.